So somebody asked me if I would come up with a kind of a flow chart or something like that that would help people understand who goes where in eternity, who gets raised when, who goes into the lake of fire, who goes to the New Jerusalem, who's on the new earth, and this, that, and the other thing. And so I thought, yeah, that's really a good idea. And so I am going to just show you sort of a preliminary flow chart that I have. I'm going to put it up here on the board. I don't have anything concrete that I can leave for you in a PDF. And I don't have all the verses written down. I am going to be quoting verses while I'm doing this, though. And if you want to look up the verses yourself, you're very welcome to do that. There's time, and I have the time and the energy. I will make this into a more permanent PDF. But if you want to write it down yourself, you can go get a piece of paper and a pencil. You can pause the video anywhere along the line and just go ahead and sort of write down how things go in this flow chart. I'm also including the barley harvest in this flow chart. So if you're interested in seeing how I view the barley harvest and how that's going to play out, or how it has played out, then you'll be interested in this little flow chart that I'm doing here. Okay, so the big question here is, where do people go? Everybody has an eternal soul. Everybody is going to go somewhere. Everyone is going to spend eternity in some place. And I've done videos on this before in the past, but I'm going to do this in a more visual way today so you can kind of see how all this works out. What we've really been handed in our Christian walk is just a really overly simplified. It's really overly simplified. If you know Jesus, you're going to heaven. No matter what, you'll go to heaven. You'll be with God forever and ever, no matter what. And if you die and you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. Okay, so it's heaven and hell. That's the two choices. But actually, the book of Revelation, the Gospels, all kinds of other places tell us about other destinies beside heaven and hell. All right. Some are better destinies than others, obviously. So anyway, this is what we're going to be looking at today. And I'm sorry if I'm going to have my back to you a lot. I'll try to turn around when I'm talking. Okay, so what I want to do first is I want to look at the destinies of Old Testament people. Now you may think, well, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not an Old Testament person. Well, you need to know about this. You need to know where Old Testament people go, what their eternal future is, because it does play into yours, okay? And also we're going to learn something about the barley harvest too when we talk about Old Testament characters. Okay, so this is our Old Testament flow chart. Now, when people die, their bodies go to sleep, okay? That's how the Bible talks about it. You die, your body is asleep, but your soul is conscious, okay? Your body goes into the grave, but your soul goes into another place where you are entirely conscious. You are aware of what's going on. In Old Testament times, when people died, they would go to the place of the dead that was called Sheol. Okay, and in the New Testament, sometimes that's called Hades. Okay, so if you were in Sheol, you would either be in a place of happiness or you would be in a place of torment. Okay, so let's divvy this out. And if you were in the place of happiness, that went by a couple of names. It would either be paradise, and the other name for it was Abraham's bosom. Okay, and this was a place of happiness. Okay, now if you were in paradise or Abraham's bosom, you would be in one of two groups. You could be there as a person of faith. Okay, so we're going to just call that a POF, a person of faith. Now you're thinking, Old Testament, well, persons of faith, what kind of faith did those people have? Well, they had saving faith. They had faith that they were trusting in God. And we're talking about people like Moses and Abraham and Sarah, and all you have to do is look at Hebrews 11 and you will see a whole list of Old Testament saints who are people of faith. Okay, now, in addition to people of faith, there are also what I would call good people. Now, you'll tell me there is no one that's good, there's none that's good, no one does right, and that's true. But even Jesus said that a good person or a good man out of his heart brings forth good things. So Jesus acknowledged that there were good people and there were wicked people. Okay, now if you're a wicked person or an evil person, you would go into the place of torment. And I'm getting a lot of this from Jesus' parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus, who was this poor beggar person, but a person who was a good person, went into Abraham's bosom and was comforted. The rich man who sought after riches his whole life and depended on his wealth for everything, he ended up in this place of torment. And between Abraham's bosom and this place of torment, there was this chasm that nobody could pass through. Okay, so that's kind of how people saw it back in the day. You have people of faith like Moses and Abraham and Jacob and Joseph, and then you have what I call just good people. Now, the thing about a good person is they have their name in the book of life. Okay, so we're going to call that book of life. And people have their name in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So there are people that we would call good people. They're still sinners, okay? And by the way, any person who has their name in the book of life is going to be redeemed because of the blood of Jesus, not because they did anything good. They're only going to be redeemed because their name is in the book of life, okay? Now, just follow me through here, okay? If you haven't watched some of my other videos, just hold on while I go through this whole process, okay? We're going to come back over here to the people of faith. At the time that Jesus died, he descended into Sheol, okay? He went to the place of the dead. Okay, so Jesus descended into Sheol, into the place of the dead. That's where he got the keys of death and Hades, okay? Remember, Jesus, when he was hanging on the cross, was separated from God. God basically turned his back on Jesus. The sun went dark, and Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Okay, so Jesus was basically cut off from God. We learn that even though Jesus was put to death in the body, he was made alive in the spirit, okay, in which he went and preached to the souls in Sheol, okay, in the place of the dead. So Jesus was basically the very first person to be made alive in the spirit. This is before he was even resurrected bodily or physically. He had to be made alive or brought back into a relationship with God the Father spiritually first. Then what Jesus did, according to Ephesians, was he emptied Sheol of certain righteous dead people, okay? The people of faith. All right, so the people of faith went to heaven. It says that Jesus led captivity captive and he gave gifts to men. So the people of faith, they were no longer in Sheol. Okay, this place of the dead, Abraham's bosom, they were now in a new place. They were in heaven in God's presence. What we have to understand here is Jesus is basically the first fruits of this particular harvest. He's the first one to be made alive in the spirit. So we're talking about a spiritual harvest here. That's what the barley harvest is. The barley harvest deals with spirits, people's souls, people who don't have bodies, okay? People who are in these ethereal places of the dead. So, and like every harvest, you have to have a first fruits, you have to have a main harvest and a gleanings. Jesus was the first fruits who was made alive in the spirit. Then what Jesus did was he took these people of faith and he brought them into heaven. They're the main harvest. They're not in a body. Their souls were transferred. Their souls were transferred from Abraham's bosom in Sheol to this new place into heaven where God is. They're the main harvest. But according to the harvest symbolism, you cannot take everything with you. You have to leave some behind. So what Jesus did, rather than leaving some people of faith behind here in Abraham's bosom, he transferred some of these people of faith, and they're called saints, and he resurrected them. And those are the people that we read about in Matthew 27. They are the saints who were resurrected. They were brought back into a mortal body again. Okay, so this is the gleanings of this harvest. So their spirits were put back into their bodies rather than being left in Sheol. Okay, so now these people would have to die again because they were not in glorified bodies. They could not be glorified until Jesus was glorified. And Jesus hadn't been glorified yet. Okay, he was still, when they were resurrected is when Jesus was resurrected, but he wasn't glorified yet. Okay, so these saints would eventually die. And this time, instead of going into Sheol, they would go straight to heaven. And that takes care of the full barley harvest. Okay, the first fruits, the main harvest, people of faith, and then the gleanings who were brought into their regular bodies again. They were saints. They appeared to people. They were recognized by people. They weren't some Old Testament person that nobody had ever heard of before. They were their friends and neighbors and relatives that all of a sudden they realized that they were alive in their regular body. But they would die, but this time they would go to heaven. Okay, these people of faith like Abraham and Moses and these saints who were at the time of living at the time of Christ and resurrected when he was resurrected from the dead. They're all spirits in heaven right now. To be absent from the body, present with the Lord. That's where these people are. But we're not talking anything about a physical resurrection at this point in time. This is just the transfer of souls from one place to another. Okay? God is taking people and he's moving them to different places. And once Christ was made alive in the spirit, well, now we could take spirits who were being, basically held in Sheol, and we could move them to where God is. And we can't take them all. That's okay. We'll resurrect some, and they'll be able to testify about what Jesus did, ripping the keys of death and Hades from the grave. I mean, Jesus was now going to be in control of all of this. So fast forward about 2,000 years, these souls of these righteous Old Testament saints, they're still in heaven along with Christians who've died and gone to heaven. They're present with the Lord too. And now comes the time of the end. Remember, Jesus was the first fruits of the resurrection. And then there is going to be people raised at his coming. Okay, we're talking about the passage in 1 Corinthians 15. Okay, so those people who are going to be raised at Jesus' coming include all the people, the groups of people that you see in the book of Revelation. These people of faith, like Moses and Abraham and Sarah, they're going to be resurrected at the time that we, hopefully, are raptured, and they will be part of the 24 elders. They're going to, get their resurrection body in heaven. They're going to be part of this group that rules and reigns. During the millennium, they're going to reign, and in the eternal age, they're going to live in the New Jerusalem. That means they're part of the bride. Only the bride gets to live in the New Jerusalem. So a lot of people will say, well, Old Testament saints, they're the guests, or Old Testament saints, this, that, and the other thing. Well, if they're people of faith like Moses, Abraham, and so on, David, there's a lot of them. Just read Hebrews 11 and you'll find out who all these people were. They are going to be part of the bride. They're going to live in the New Jerusalem in eternity. What about these good people? Okay, they're still in the Abraham's bosom part of the paradise part of Sheol. It's the place of the dead. They're not yet in God's presence. They have to wait until after the millennium. And then they're going to stand at the great white throne judgment. And because their names are in the book of life, they will live on the new earth. And because their names are in the book of life, they will have access to the New Jerusalem. They won't live in the New Jerusalem, but they'll have access to the New Jerusalem. You can only have access to the New Jerusalem if your name is in the Lamb's book of life. This resurrection right here is what I call the general resurrection. This is what Martha was referring to as the last day, where she says, I know we're all going to be raised at the last day. When she's talking about last day, the great white throne judgment is really the last day, okay? And this is the general resurrection. This is when most people are going to be resurrected. Okay, so now remember, Christ is the first fruits of the resurrection of the dead when he rose from the dead physically. These are people who are raised at his coming. Okay, that's the main harvest, and then and then comes the end, and that's when these people are raised. This is what we would call the first or premier resurrection. Paul calls it the out resurrection, okay, in Philippians. It's the out resurrection. He wanted to be a part of the out resurrection of the dead. Okay, he didn't want to be a part of this resurrection here. He didn't want to just be a good person who had his name in the book of life. He wanted to be a part of this resurrection right here of kings and priests and really anybody who belongs to Christ. He wanted to be a part of that, especially the people who rule and reign with Christ. The 144,000, the 24 elders, the martyrs of the beast. All of these are people who are going to rule with Christ during the millennium, which is right here. There are wicked people in the Old Testament who are in this place of torment, in the nasty half of Sheol. I'm trying to think of wicked people in the Old Testament, and I'm thinking of people like Nimrod, Jezebel. There's all kinds of wicked people in the Bible, and you can take your pick. There's a lot of them. These are people who do not have their name in the book of life. Okay, so they're not in the book of life. When the great white throne judgment happens at the end of the millennium and their names are not in the book of life, they're going to go into the lake of fire. Now remember, the lake of fire was originally designed and prepared for the devil and his angels. God had no intention that all people would go there. But people will go there. There will be a lot of people who go there. And their names, if their names are not in the book of life, they go into the lake of fire. Now, is it possible that some of these tormented people, these wicked people, might not go into the lake of fire? I suppose that is possible. I do have a question mark about this. We know that in the book of Revelation, there is a place of the dead that's kind of referred to as the sea. And there's both good and bad people that come out of the sea. The sea is just a symbol or metaphor for death. We know the beast will come from the sea, and we know that Christ will take authority over the land and the sea, the place of the dead and the place of the living, the land of the living. And it may be that the sea has both, good and bad sides to it, just kind of like Sheol does. And we know that death and Hades, or death and Sheol, will be cast into the lake of fire. And we know the sea is going to go into the lake of fire too. So this is a place of the dead. And it may be that there are people in this place here that it's not so cut and dried about where they end up. Okay, we know that the beast will end up in the lake of fire. But I'm thinking of an Old Testament person called Balaam. We read his story in the book of Numbers. He was, he had the Holy Spirit. He prophesied. He has some of the most magnificent, beautiful prophecies in the Old Testament. Really wonderful prophecies. But he loved money more than he loved God, and he was willing to sell his spiritual understanding so that it would put a curse on the people of God, on Israel. And Balaam is put forth as a negative example of someone who is walking with God and then sells out. Okay, so he kind of equates with people who are categorized as apostates in the New Testament. Okay. These are people who fall away from the faith or abandon the faith. And I said in a couple of videos ago, you can't abandon something you didn't have. So these are people who had faith, and for whatever reason, they were willing to sell it out for financial gain or some other kind of gain. Now, because New Testament apostates, even people who are still alive right now, who sell out, who sell their faith for something that's worthless, because they have been born again of the Spirit of God, because they are, believe in Jesus, or at one time they did, and they were given a seal that says they belong to God, they are not thrown into the lake of fire. Okay. The Bible tells us that they're going to be going into a place of gloom and darkness. And they're like wandering stars. Okay, remember, believers are compared to stars. And these are dark stars who wander. They don't have a place to go. They are out in the darkness. And we know in the New Jerusalem, there's going to be a place called the outer darkness. There's a place outside the city, and that's where the wicked people go to lament their sorry state because they sold something very, very valuable. Okay, and it may be that a person, Old Testament person like Balaam, will end up in this same place as well. They're not exactly going to go into the lake of fire, but they aren't going to have the joys of eternity either. Okay, so this is how it works for Old Testament saints. Okay, in another video, I'm going to talk about how this works if you're a believer, because the flow chart is a little different for believers, and especially if you're an end time believer, if you're someone who is alive, right now, and Christ returns, the flow chart is a little different. And you'll notice there's nothing over here about priests or worshipers or martyrs or anything like that. This is just about people who rule and reign. So what about the fifth seal martyrs? Where do they show up? What about the people who overcome the beast and so on in Revelation 15? Where are they in a flow chart? So I'll do another flow chart talking about basically where people go who are, New Testament believers in Jesus, who've been born again of the Spirit of God and are living during the last days. Okay, because there's some special groups that are significant only if you're a last days person. Okay, they don't apply to people who've died in the past. All right, so if you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. I hope this has kind of clarified things for you a little bit. We're not talking about people going to heaven and hell. Okay, that's not exactly what we're talking about at all. There are going to be a number of places that people will go depending on certain criteria. If you have your name in the book of life, then you can go live on the new earth. If you are born again in the Spirit of God, you are going to be living in the New Jerusalem as part of the bride. If you're a wicked person and your name is not in the book of life, there is one fate for you. That's the lake of fire. And there's two resurrections, 2 times of resurrection. Well, there's 3 actually. The first one was when Jesus was raised from the dead. But other than that, there are 2 main resurrections. One is the first resurrection, the premier resurrection, the one of kings and priests, the one for Christians. And then there is the general resurrection, which is at the last day. This is when anybody who is not a Christian will be raised from the dead, and if their name is in the book of life, they live on the new earth with access to the New Jerusalem. If their name is not in the book of life, they go into the lake of fire. And then we have this other group over here that as far as like Balaam and, Old Testament people who were apostates, who sold their ministry basically for money and fame and comfort and what have you, we're not sure exactly where they go. And they're held up, especially Balaam, they're held up as what not to do. Do not be like this person. Peter talks about Balaam. The book of Revelation is going to talk about Balaam. And you do not want to follow after that kind of example. Okay, so hope you've enjoyed this video. Leave a comment, share it with somebody. Leave a thumbs up too if you could. That'd be great. And we'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.